Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Kessler, and I am the host of the podcast Rewiring Health. This podcast is devoted to giving you expert information around nervous system regulation, subconscious mind reprogramming, and a variety of health topics so that you can optimize your life. Stop feeling burnt out, overwhelmed, in pain, and start living your life where you can remain successful without compromising your health. Oh, we've all been there. That dreaded time of the month where we start to anticipate the mood swings, the inflammation, the bloating, the exhaustion that comes around our period. But does it have to be like that? Why do periods get so normalized to be this awful thing that we experience every month? Well, in this episode, I have the pleasure of inviting Dinara Mukh on, who gives you a different perspective of how to look at your period. How can we use our period to give us information? What are the signals and information that it's telling us about our bodies and how we can optimize our health? This episode covers so many things, including stress and hormones, infertility, pregnancy, menopause, food cravings, and so much more. Dinara dives in deep and gives so many golden nuggets of information that are going to help you think differently about your period and your body. Dinara Mukh is the host of the podcast Feel Better, Be Better. She is also a certified women's health coach, TEDx speaker, helping women restore hormonal balance naturally through nourishment and targeted lifestyle changes and reconnect with their menstrual cycle so that they can look and feel great. She has helped dozens of women gain control over the health and step out of overwhelm and live healthier lives. I am so grateful to have Dinara on, and I truly enjoyed this conversation, and I know you will too. So stick around, and you will think differently about your body and your menstrual cycle when you're done. So you wake up, your phone is right on the table next to you, and it feels almost like a magnet. You grab the phone, and before you know it, you subconsciously open every app, scroll through social media, you're on your email, you're looking at the news headlines, and you're feeling stressed. And this is how you start your day. I can't tell you how many times I did this, and it did not serve me. It set me up to be in a whirlwind of negativity, and I was just starting my day. And that's why I created the morning guide for perfectionists. So if you struggle with negativity throughout the day, and it's even worse in the morning because you don't have a routine, this will help you tremendously. It's literally everything that I implement that has helped me start my day with the right intentions and put myself into a place of inner harmony. So grab in the link below and enjoy. Excited to be joined by Dinara Mukh. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on, Kelly.
Yes, I can't wait to have this conversation because we're just saying like it is such an important topic, understanding our hormones, our cycles. And I think so many women, like myself included, for years, I didn't understand that. I mean, this is, and I think there's a lot of shame where you're like, you notice different changes in, each month and then you don't even understand why. And then it's that there is a basis for why we experience what we experience and how we can really optimize our ability to understand that and move forward. So before we start, do you mind just sharing your story and how you got into doing what you do today and the people that you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of like what you said in the preface, specifically the why piece of it, and we'll talk about it because I think when it comes to hormones and to health in general, sometimes we follow things because we don't really understand why we're doing them, just because somebody said it. And that's the big part of my work is I really want for women to understand why it's so important to balance hormones. Why are we working with our menstrual cycles? Why is the mindset so important? And it's the why piece of it, which is awesome. I'm excited to jump into it. But my story began, I want to say probably in my early 20s is when it actually started. I used to have excruciatingly painful periods to the point that I had to call an ambulance a couple of times. And it was pretty sort of traumatic as far as the pain goes. I'd lose all blood on my face. I'd just go completely pale. And I actually thought it was my appendix that ruptured. But then once the ambulance arrived, they told me, no, this is actually just your period pain. And you should count your lucky stars, take some aspirin, and it sort of will go away kind of thing. And then I was tested for, I decided to go to the doctor just to find out, could I be having things like more serious conditions? Maybe it's endometriosis, maybe it's something else. But the doctor said, no, this is just your period cramps. It's normal. Everyone experiences it. But if you'd like to fix it, we can put you on the birth control. And of course, I was quite happy that there was a solution. Within 10 minutes of seeing a doctor, I walked out with a prescription for birth control, which I've taken. But over the course of very quickly 3 months, I realized that birth control is actually didn't heal my period pain. My period was still arriving with a lot of pain. I still had a period, and now I had a lot of other symptoms. So in short to say, birth control didn't work for me, had to come out of it. And then after decided that the only way I'm going to be able to heal myself is actually just to get to the bottom of it on my own. And that's what I did. And that's sort of what led me to this work. But it wasn't until more sort of the period pain began in early 20s, struggled with it for many years, just sort of taking the painkillers, popping in the painkillers before going to bed so I wouldn't be woken up in the middle of the night. And like all of those sort of, really, now that I know how unhealthy those habits were, it's like now I'm horrified. But back in the day, this is just kind of how you deal with it. And then at about 30s, like 31 or so, I started to get just a lot of weight gain that I wasn't able to lose. And no matter what I was doing, I wasn't able to lose any weight. No matter, like, I had adrenal fatigue, I was always exhausted, and I didn't really connect all of those symptoms. They all seemed so separate. And then a friend recommended that I'll look into menstrual cycles, and I did that. And then I've realized that my menstrual cycle is actually so much more than just presence and absence of my period, but it's this whole fluctuations of hormones and how my body changes, how much I need to change what I'm eating, how I'm training, and all of those things. And as I was learning it and implementing it, I've almost pretty quickly, I've welcomed my first pain-free periods in, like, I don't want to say in 15 years. And my weight came off, my inflammation came off, and I started talking to other women. And what I quickly realized is this is not something we taught. This is not something we talk about. And I was like, well, this is my calling. And I ended up sort of, at the time, I ended up quitting my job, and I basically started this whole practice of mine, which now I help women to reconnect with their menstrual cycles, balance their hormones naturally, and just stop being overwhelmed by their health and actually understand what is happening and how to support it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And because this is going to resonate with so many people, because I know so many people have gone through similar things where it's like they're struggling with their periods, they're in pain, and it's like, they go to the doctor and they get a Band-Aid on it, but it doesn't ever actually do anything to help them, just like you experienced. And it's so needed to understand how we can honor ourselves and recognize the root cause of things and not just cover it and mask it, because it doesn't do anything for us in the long term. And just like you're saying, the ill effects of some of these things that we do to mask the symptoms are really detrimental. Yeah, it's amazing what you do. And just going off of that, can you talk about how we can kind of recognize like what our needs are, like when we have like a hormonal imbalance, and what are some things we can look for when we have that? Like, what are symptoms that we can notice that the root cause is a hormonal imbalance?
Yeah, but I think it would be helpful to sort of explain to people what are actually hormones.
Yeah.
So, because as women, we don't really think about hormones except for when we go through puberty, when we have a baby, or when we go sort of through menopause, perimenopause. That's when the hormones kind of start screaming at us. And that's when we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so hormonal. But actually, the hormones is what makes us us. It on a daily basis, they run throughout us, and they're essentially chemical messengers that run from one gland to the next, to our organs, to our body tissues, and it communicates to our body, have more energy, metabolize food, have this sort of mood, lose weight, store weight, and have the energy for exercise, not have the energy, not in those specific terms, but in the way that we synthesize muscle and how we build our bodies, our bone, sort of the bone strength, our menstrual cycle, ovulation. So they basically makes us us. And often they sort of just do their job. We don't really think about it. But however, because of the lifestyle, because of the medications, as you mentioned, because of the ever increasing stress of a modern day woman, because of lack of boundaries, because of not understanding nervous system dysregulation, which you're very familiar with, and all of those sort of, a lot of it also is food, the sort of foods that we're eating, a lot of processed and packaged foods that seem to have made our life easier because now we can just pick it up from the package, maybe put it in a microwave, open and eat it. But actually what it really did is it made us overfed but undernourished. So we're not getting the nourishment that we need. And whenever our body is not in this optimal state, naturally it begins to send signs, and the glands of the hormones can either release too much hormones, too little hormones in response sort of to this life events. So when you begin to experience sort of how you would know that you have hormone imbalances is you would just start experiencing just a lot of discomfort, something that is a little bit hard to explain. It's something that doesn't quite make you feel like yourself. So some of the things that you might notice is fatigue, maybe you gaining belly fat and you've never really was storing belly in that area, brain fog, headaches, migraines, bloating, a lot of digestive issues like constipation, diarrhea related to that, period pain, irregular periods, all of the things that are related to sort of our daily life, all of a sudden they sort of go off kilt, then that's usually a sign that something is going on. Because at the end of the day, the symptoms is just simply the language of our body that's typically trying to tell us, yo, hey, like pay attention to this is off. But too many of us are so used to taking the pill, taking something quick that'll just resolve it in order to get a quick relief, which is completely understandable when you need it in the short term. But at the end of the day, if you don't really address the underlying root cause of those imbalances, which a lot of the time comes down to lifestyle, exercise, movement, and how we nourish ourselves, then they'll persist, often leading to more serious issues. Sometimes it can become diabetes, heart issues, bone issues, osteoporosis, and or with women specifically, conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome, fibroids, endometriosis. These are all very common conditions that get developed as part of hormone imbalances.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I think sometimes a lot of times, women just almost like normalize these symptoms like, oh, this is just how it is, and then until you recognize that, like, you don't have to live like this your whole life. Like there are things you can do. It's almost so it's so empowering to recognize that like you can change these symptoms, and through, like you said, behavioral things and lifestyle things, like they're all modifiable without the secondary consequences of some of these medications that you're taking long term. But so important to recognize, like you said, that it's important to, help in the short term. Maybe those medications are appropriate, but you have to do something in conjunction with that to help you move forward so that you can actually have longevity and not experience some of these symptoms.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as far as some of these, what people experience and all these symptoms, what would be like a good starting point for someone who's like saying like, oh, hey, I do have digestive issues, I do have the excess belly fat, like maybe my mood is all over the place. Where would you recommend somebody starting to help themselves in that process?
Yeah, I think at first it's just important to recognize what are the things that are getting usually abnormal. In my practice, especially if you're a woman within reproductive age, meaning that you have an active menstrual cycle, the menstrual cycle will usually give a lot of answers. And the menstrual cycle is essentially often when we look at our menstrual cycles, we think period/menstruation, hence it's because it's in the word. But actually menstrual cycle lasts for anywhere between 25 to 36 days. And menstrual cycle is not the same as the period. And period is just a small part of the menstrual cycle. And over the course of menstrual cycle, women have fluctuating hormones. Our hormones ebb and flow pretty dramatically. And with it changes how we metabolize food, how our appetite, our energy, our desire for social activities, creativity, productivity, quite literally touches every single part of our life. So often what I would get women to do is just to get to know their menstrual cycle and just understand how, first of all, beginning to track it and understanding when it begins, when it ends, how long is your actual period, and then tracking the symptoms. And often the symptoms will pop up with some sort of rhythm or there's going to be some sort of sequence to it. There's going to be bloating at a certain term. There's going to be some issues at a certain time. Like those are the things that would be very helpful. As far as things like belly fat that might not necessarily seem to be related to our menstrual cycles, but also kind of seeing at which point did you end up starting to have belly fat, because belly fat often is due to sometimes it's due to estrogen, sometimes it's due to, a lot of it is due to cortisol, due to excess stress, especially when we sort of have it in our midsection and it just won't budge. Sometimes it's because of hormonal changes. Maybe you have stopped having regular menstrual cycles and now you're transitioning into perimenopause. So there's could be so many variations, but just sort of looking for patterns and trying to understand your body a little bit better. And the menstrual cycle is such a sort of perfect outline in order to do it. And it starts with as simple as understanding sort of the length of the cycle, and then going deeper, understanding that each cycle actually goes through different phases of the cycle. There's part of your menstrual cycle where you have low hormonal fluctuations, and there's part when your hormones are much higher, and just seeing how do your symptoms change during that time. And once you understand that, then you're able to dig a little bit deeper. And that's when you can dive into what I work with women on, is cycle syncing, to teach women to eat with their menstrual cycles, exercise and train with their menstrual cycles, plan targeted lifestyle changes that actually quite literally fit their body like a glove, because we're using their own menstrual cycle as an example and helping them to heal.
Oh, I love that. It's such a proactive approach too, because when you start to understand that this is just how your body is working and it's doing exactly what's supposed to, now you can take away some of that emotional like aggravation a lot of women experience. Like there's that like hate relationship I feel like a lot of women experience with their period, like, oh, my period, because they experience so many things. But if you can be proactive and you can start taking an active role in minimizing those symptoms, now you can start to just honor yourself through that process rather than dread when those moments come. So I love that proactive approach that you do through those
Exactly.
cycles.
And the period specifically, it's like sort of, it's been acknowledged that period is our fifth vital sign. So just as breath, pulse, and all of those things are incredibly important for well-being for women, period is our fifth vital sign, meaning that the health of our period is directly correlates to our overall health. And the reason being that's the case for women is because whether a woman wants to get pregnant or she doesn't want to get pregnant, optimizing her fertility and having a body that is optimized for reproduction is basically at the evolutionary, at the core of how women essentially exist. So often when we play with things like long prolonged intermittent fasting, maybe cutting out food groups like carbohydrates, going for a lot of stress, that sort of state puts female body into lack of safety state. It puts us in a place of inside our bodies, just not a safe place to bring a baby. And when that happens, typically some of the things that we see is the periods either show up late or you just skip them. They show up with extreme pain or a lot of discomfort. And the period is sort of like, and I like it with my clients because sometimes they would go through extremely stressful periods and the periods will show up late and they're like, I know exactly why that happened. Or sometimes they would indulge a little bit too much, like over the course of Christmas and New Year's, people tend to drink a bit too much and eat a lot of foods, and their periods would usually arrive a little bit more painful when it comes to January and February. So the period is quite literally every single month kind of gives you this like, this is what you've done, kind of like receipt, at the store. This is what you've done this month sort of thing. So actually, and I've done a TED talk when I talk about menstrual cycle as your superpower. And one of the things I say is that I'm actually in love with my period just because it gives me such an insight. And I think whenever I say that, people get this bit of an allergic reaction because they're like love and period in the same sentence. But actually, it's really, there is just so much information that our body gives us on a monthly basis. And as women, we're lucky to have it.
Yeah, I love that perspective because so many, again, I think just being in tune with our body is so important, and having that more biofeedback from our body is just so crucial. So when we can look at it as a language and a communication from our body rather than being, that again, that hate relationship, it does change and shift that perspective, because what a gift that is. And as you speak of, like, what a gift that is that we can kind of figure out what our needs are and how we can honor them through that messaging system of our period. So I do love that perspective because like I haven't heard that before, and I love that. And I think if we can start shifting that, and now it's working for us rather than many of us think of it, oh, it's working against us. And it's a hindrance. So I just love that perspective. Going off of that, this is more of like a curiosity thing, and I'm sure women are going to experience this, but I do have a friend who she's done having children, but she continues to use birth control more to just not have a period. So she continues to be on hormones all the time so she doesn't have to deal with her period. What do you say about that? Because now she's not getting the biofeedback, and now you're changing the rhythm of the cycle. What happens when that goes on within the system?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask, why do you not want your period? Is it because there's a lot of messaging over the course of the life that you heard that it's dirty or it's not acceptable? In which case, I would challenge that narrative, because it's just simply not right. Because women are period is just part of who we are. Maybe if she's having things like extremely painful periods, and that's how her life has been, and it's completely takes her out for half of the month. Like there could be so many different reasons why people choose to go on the pill. But the truth is, and maybe it's just simply not to get pregnant, because having another pregnancy is just simply not feasible. Of course, there are some reproductive laws in the United States of America. Like it's a bit hard to be like, this is just so terrible, because for some women that is the only option. Yet, I'll speak from a personal experience and from a lot of research that I've done with women that have come to me. Pill didn't work for me because the base of the pill, the way that it works is it shuts down the communication between our ovaries and our hypothalamus. So essentially between our brain and our ovaries. So that way we never initiate ovulation. But ovulation, sometimes when we think about our menstrual cycles, we think that our period is the star of our menstrual cycle. But it's actually the ovulation that is the star of our menstrual cycle, because ovulation happens only when there's a perfect amount of hormones peaked at one specific time, and it's all been done sort of right in the body, and then this sort of magic of ovulation happens. But then after that happens, we produce a lot of hormones, one of the big ones being progesterone. And progesterone hormone is very important for bone density, for mood, for kind of helping us with sleep. And it's also the hormone that we produce that helps us to age more gracefully, and it helps with just so many, with vitality, with mood. It helps with so many things. And when we don't do it, when we take pill in order to stop it, we simply don't get the benefits of the full period and of all of the hormones that our body is naturally meant to produce. And often there's a number of side effects. One of the most common being women tend to gain weight on the pill. There's a certain percentage of them that do. There's also been a study done in Copenhagen who has followed a women of, it was a very large study of, I want to say, either 100,000 or a million. It was a lot of women that they followed after they've taken birth control pill. And I found that 30-40% of them ended up going on antidepressants when they've never had a depression episode before. So it affects your mood. And I can attest to that, because I went through it, both being on IUD and also being on the birth control pill. My mood just tanked, and just because of the way that it messes with our serotonin levels. Another big part is because you continuously getting hormones released into your body has to get more efficient at getting it out of your body. And it's not that we change our lifestyle when we necessarily take hormonal pills, but we continue with our lifestyle, we continue with processed foods, and it tends to deplete some of the nutrients that are responsible for our gut issues. So if you're somebody who is on the pill and you're always struggling with some sort of gut issues, maybe it's diarrhea, bloating, constipation, then that could be a reason why. And it also depletes sort of the gut bacteria, the imbalance between it, because we're constantly getting those hormones out that needs to be processed out of our body. So it just affects it sort of in the long term. Another big one that it affects, since it shuts down our ovulation, it tends to affect our libido, which for some women, we don't take it in order not to get pregnant, but then we have zero desire for having any intimacy whatsoever. So it feels like, what is this deal? So it's kind of like, it's just robbing women of really having that full experience. And often when women get on the pill, or come off the pill rather, they experience this sort of more colorful life, because when you're on the pill, experiences sort of it can get dulled down a little bit. Like you don't have this spectrum of emotions of like, I'm so happy, I'm so sad, which is kind of the beauty of life. You kind of experience all of those things. And the excess hormones, estrogen, progesterone, the mix, depending on the pill that you take, can really affect it. And again, these are all very studied side effects. These are all very common. However, they don't really apply to every woman. There are certainly some women that are poster child for birth control, and it does work for them. And it's probably the nature of my work, the women that I usually meet experience a lot of symptoms. And I personally have experienced symptoms on both of them. And there is a lot of side effects. So it kind of comes down to your preferences and really being honest with yourself. Why are you doing it? And if you're trying to not have a baby and you really want to be off birth control, there is a fantastic method that's called fertility awareness method. That's actually 97% effective if it's done right. And it basically includes tracking your menstrual cycle and just knowing your fertility window, because women are not pregnant every day. It's men who are able to impregnate women, are able to do it every day, but it's women women are only able to get pregnant for 5 to 6 days. So you measure body temperature, you can measure cervical mucus, you can measure the position of your cervix. There's a number of ways to measure and understand exactly when your body going through that fertility window, so you can be extra cautious and therefore avoid pregnancy.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing all that, because it's so important to be informed. I mean, I know birth control is such a personal decision, and whatever
Yeah.
you choose and how you do it, but I think it's so important to be informed when you make those decisions, because my experience, I was on it for 7 years myself, is like, it was just like, here, do this, like, and there was no education around it. And it's like, I wish there was more understanding of what some of the side effects were from doing that, because I think a lot of people experience that, where they get on the birth control and they do experience a lot of the symptoms that you just discussed. And like, I know just personally, I felt very kind of flat from it. And I actually experienced melasma in my face and had a lot of like side effects from it. And I didn't understand at the time that was all related to the birth control. And then I started kind of piecing it together that this was all related to each other. And then once I got off of it, I noticed a lot of changes that were for the better. So, but again, I think it's, no matter what anyone chooses, and like, obviously no judgment here, but like, it's important to make your own decision, but with information that is valid, and understanding like what this is going to do to your body, and how you can make the best decision for you. So thank you for sharing those, because like I said, I don't think this is widely shared, and birth control is kind of like handed out very easily without people knowing what this is actually doing to many systems of their body.
But it's also given out by doctors, and there's a lot of bias in the doctors sort of world against women, and women are often, a lot of their symptoms of like thyroid or other symptoms can be written off as like it's maybe just stress. And when it comes to gynecological issues, if you're asking for anything, unless you want to get pregnant, then the solution is usually the pill. And I know we spoke about women that want to not get pregnant, but also there are women who in like with birth control, as far as statistics go, 50% of those are being placed in order to fix or control symptoms, things like acne, things like painful periods, which I was on, which didn't help at all. I can attest to that. And there's just so many, every single symptoms that can possibly alter our bodies. And I know that we sort of playing God when we're like altering our systems, and it does work in some way, but there's so many side effects that come with it when we mess with our body's natural processes. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And I do think that informed decision and just understanding what is actually causing it, or even just like cluing in on when it is causing it, being like, oh my gosh, would this be it? And then just being proactive about finding different options.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just having that information and that insight is so crucial. And just being, because again, the healthcare system, it's, we have to be our biggest advocate, our own advocate. So we have to know what we're doing going into it, because we're the ones who have to look out for ourselves at the end of the day. So it's so important to, understand, have this information. And thank you for what you do, because that's so crucial for women to understand what is going on within their body and how they can make the best decision for themselves. So huge with that. Kind of talking about, again, like cycles and everything, a big things that happen in, women's life, again, is going to be like pregnancy and like menopause. Can you talk about how we can start to understand our cycles a little bit better, after a pregnancy? Like, I know I've had 2 pregnancies, and everything changed kind of after them. And can you talk about how our cycles kind of get back onto rhythm, and what happens after a pregnancy, and then, menopause as well?
Yeah. So female body is a known thing. It's completely going through complete rebirth and change whenever they have a baby. And it very much depends on the woman, how long it takes to recover. I think often women have a baby and they're like, all right, when am I going to the gym? When am I going to do this? And sort of not really allowing our body to rest and just understand the insane process that it went through. I think some of the latest statistics shows that it takes almost 1 year or 2 years for women to really go back to feeling like their normal self and being restored. Because also when you are pregnant, you can experience a lot of depletion. It's a lot of effect on your hormones. Some women develop diabetes when they're pregnant. So there's a variety of things that happens. It's a very intensive biological process. And once you sort of have a baby, the most important thing is just being patient with yourself and not rushing into things, doing things like low effort low effort activities, a lot of walking, and just really enjoying being with your baby. And for many women, they also nurse, so they breastfeed for a while. And when we breastfeed, we produce a hormone called prolactin, which can interrupt with our normal menstrual cycles. So it can sort of disrupt the ovulation, and as your body is getting through a process. So my biggest advice for it would be just to be patient with your body. And also a massive part of it is nourishment, is sort of bringing your body back to balance. And I think when you do have a baby, you're so concerned with this little human that you're trying to make and survive, and you don't really think about your nutrition. Everything becomes about them. And I do think that it's wherever possible important to remember that as a mom, you're also a human who needs to take care of the baby and not neglect your nutrition. I understand you might not be able to do these delicate breakfasts every morning that you were doing before, but still having proper nutrition, getting appropriate amount of protein, which is incredibly important, getting appropriate amount of fats and carbohydrates with every single meal, just to help your body go through that restoration process.
Yeah. So, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't want to cut you off there.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention about the perimenopause. It's
Yeah.
again same process in the sense that like your body once again going through massive changes, and the big ones here is because your ovaries have been producing a lot of estrogen up until that point, and as you go through perimenopause, which can start for some women as early as 35, but the entire transition can go for almost 10 years for some women, and you only really in menopause after you have not had a period for 12 months altogether, because sometimes women sort of don't have a period, then in 11 months it arrives. That means you're still in perimenopause. But over the course, there's a lot of this like scare around menopause. Oh my gosh, this horrible hot flashes. And to be fair, like it does happen in women that it affects, it can really change it. But also it's not majority of the women that are experiencing those symptoms. And there is a lot that's in your control to do now, especially if you are within reproductive years. Again, having your blood sugar balanced, having proper nutrition, having exercise, having stress management technique, taking supplementation when it's necessary, managing your stress, all of the things that are so essential for health. The more you sort of check off of those, the more smooth your transition would be as you go through perimenopause and menopause. And I guess the biggest thing with perimenopause is as your ovaries no longer produce as much estrogen, sometimes your adrenals tend to pick up on that, and they have to produce that estrogen hormone. And if you're too stressed, it'll kind of make adrenal works on double whammy. So it can create a lot of uncomfortable symptoms, discomfort, brain fog, just not being able to really think clearly. And also, as you sort of you're no longer ovulating, and you might not be producing the hormone called progesterone that tends to calm our nervous system. That also can affect sleep for many women. So it's important to kind of pay attention and seeing what your symptoms are. It's also important to bring it to your doctor and just discuss your option if your symptoms are severe enough that it actually needs medication, because there is a lot that you can do naturally, and sometimes you might need help.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. Again, I think it's just one of those like anxiety provoking things, because it's like you hear menopause and you hear all the doom and gloom stories of it, and it's like this thing that's inevitable, and it's going to happen at some point. You don't really know what to expect or how your body is going to react. But what I love about what you just said is that there's so many actionable steps that you can take to minimize the symptoms of it and really serve yourself and help your body go through that process as smoothly as it possibly can. So I love all that. Kind of going off that, I know you touched on stress. Can you talk about stress? Because this is something that so many people experience, especially after the pandemic, where it threw people through a loop, and it causes a lot of changes within the hormonal system. Can you talk about some of those changes and what we might experience if we're in a really, really stressful state?
Yeah, for sure. Stress is it's definitely the biggest hormonal disruptor for women, specifically, just because the way that it affects our body is pretty destructive. And I actually see a lot of women in my practice that are coming after COVID now, just because their body did such a it affected them so much for being the prolonged amount of stress. And for some of them lost periods for extended period of time. Some of them have heavier periods, some of them skipped loads of them. So it's a very intensive process on our bodies. And as far as sort of in general stress is concerned when it comes from hormonal standpoint, so when we get exposed to things like acute stressors, maybe it's exercise, maybe it's things that are kind of come up and sort of stress us, and then we go away. It's kind of like if a lion runs after us, it catches us, maybe we run away, then we go home, sort of shake it off, and we relax and off we go. However, it's the chronic stress that's becoming such a massive epidemic, quite literally in every country, because I've lived in Canada, I've lived in the UK, I live in France now, and like it's the same everywhere. It's like just simply everywhere. But the biggest sort of enemy is the chronic stress, and it's what the way the stress is sort of released from our bodies. Whenever we first be exposed to danger, we usually release what's called adrenaline, noradrenaline, and if the stress is continuously stayed prolonged in our system, our body begins to release cortisol, and cortisol is often we hear about it as our stress hormone, and because it's the hormone that released in response to stress, and it's great in the danger situations. However, whenever we constantly being triggered, or there's something that constantly releases our cortisol levels, that's then creates the chronic secretion of cortisol. And sometimes when we continuously producing it, maybe it's been really stressful, adrenal glands can be releasing a lot of cortisol, and then there's at some point going to come the time when adrenal glands, what's famously called as adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion, is not producing cortisol as efficiently. So then women go sort of from high cortisol system, from always being the high cortisol will feel like everything is slow around you, like you're always jittery, you always need to move people faster, you always just kind of like move, go, and if things are, sometimes you think like people around you just annoy you because they move so slowly because you're just so hyper, and then you can kind of switch over that mountain and over that hump and produce low cortisol, and that will result in places like and symptoms like fatigue, exhaustion, and it's kind of like hard to get yourself out of bed. Your sleep will get disturbed because cortisol is also a very important hormones when it comes to our sleep, and it relates in our sleep and waking cycles. So those are the symptoms and sort of the things that women will begin to experience. But taking care of your stress is, it's probably one of the most important things. But I think when we say take care of your stress, it's kind of like we're saying the sky is blue, like it's such an obvious thing, but it's the application of it that's difficult. And I think it's the most important things is just finding the small moments and crafting out as far as the things that would really help you. I'm a massive fan of like walks. 20-30 minute walks can really calm your nervous system. Sometimes you can simply rock around the chair just to kind of calm your nervous system, having the proper nourishment, actually allowing yourself and giving yourself time for nourishment. And the biggest one is sleep, because sleep disruption is the very it's a massive trigger for stress, because when we haven't slept, and I'm sure you and your listeners experienced that, you just wake up next day, you don't make decisions right, you're always worried, nothing seems to go well. So all of those things are super important when it comes to managing stress, and stress is also like our stress hormone and our cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and progesterone, which is a very important sex hormone, are actually produced from the same mother hormone. So when we have too much stress, it will hijack our ovulation and our periods, and it will also make us sort of more wired, creating more hormone imbalances. And that's what results with women. Often, if they have been under a stressful period, they don't see their period for a while, because it's just the body simply shuts down the reproductive system, because when it's stressful, it's not a safe place to bring a baby, so the body will do its thing in order to protect you. So yes, stress is a big part of it. I hope that kind of went around it, but I hope that ends.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I like how you said it is, and obviously the stress affects things, but I think when I find when people understand what it's actually doing, when like, just like you talked about the physiology of it and what's going on within your body, you can understand how impactful it is. Because I think almost, again, stress has been kind of like, oh, we're all under stress, and it's been so normalized, but we're not meant to be in survival mode like this. Our bodies were meant to, again, run from the lion, like you said, and then go home and just kind of rest. And we're not getting in that state. So, thank you for sharing all those parts that stress impacts, because when we can understand what it's doing now, hopefully, people take them and be like, I need to be proactive about this. I need to start working on the stress levels in my life, because there's too many things that are, excuse me, important that are being impacted by it.
Yeah.
About the reproduction and everything. So one thing I've experienced with many of my friends and the people in my life is infertility and difficulty getting pregnant. And can you just talk about that a little bit more, and the impacts of hormones and the stress and maybe long-term birth control, and how that has, what you've seen in your practice with difficulty getting pregnant? Because I know that's such a I mean, I know the people I know who've gone through, it's just an awful, awful process, and it's very emotional. So if you can just bring some information to that and what
Yeah.
people, just so people can kind of understand what they can do to help themselves in that situation.
Definitely. And infertility is, as you say, it is definitely a big topic because it's affecting so many women. And as I mentioned earlier, like one of the main reasons that women sort of exist in the world, I guess, is to reproduce. So a lot of it going to come down to optimizing fertility, whether you want to get pregnant or not. And especially when you want to get pregnant, things are getting more and more, it gets more and more frustrating. And often with people that I see, what usually happens is they go to the doctor and they would ask them all sorts of questions. However, it's rarely that they ask them the basics, as things like, what are you actually eating? How stressed are you? How much are you sleeping? What is your menstrual cycle like? Have you been tracking it? What's your ovulation? And it's just a lot of the very basic things often being unaddressed. And often this is where it lies when it comes down to our infertility. A lot of it is just because your basics are going to heal things like your gut. It'll heal system like your nervous system, but the gut, specifically gut and thyroid, have a lot to do when it comes to fertility and when it comes to being able to have a baby. And if your gut is imbalanced, if there is certain bacteria in it, you can do tests like GI mapping tests that will often show things that are happening, that will often show specifically the things that might be interrupting in the way that your hormones are getting synthesized. And also a lot of now thyroid hormone specifically, our thyroid actually converts from inactive into active form in our gut. And once again, if our gut is imbalanced, that it will affect our thyroid, and then it'll affect our fertility. I have seen clients who come off of birth control and unable to get pregnant for 2 years, 3 years, depending how long you've been on birth control. Because if women get on birth control at, like, I don't know, 15 years old, and then they don't come off of it until they 35, then they've been on it for most of their life, meaning that for most of their life, their body didn't have this communication of what between hypothalamus, our ovaries, and everything that needs to go on. So this whole process needs to restart, and your body sort of needs to still get to know itself in order to be able to actually do its processes. So that's a very important part. When you come off of birth control, some people will get immediately pregnant, and that's fantastic, but a lot of people, it will take some restoring of their bodies, and often it'll take like restoring of vitamins that have been depleted. And it's a lot of the time things like vitamin B, selenium, zinc, all of those, vitamin B complex, folate, are all incredibly important nutrients in order for our body to actually even be able to reproduce. And I think sometimes women put a lot of pressure on themselves, and sometimes it's not a women's issue. Often there's a lot of studies out there to show that a lot of men have a low testosterone count. So even though sometimes women put them through all of this tests and feel like there's something is off, I would always recommend also seeing what's going on with your partner. What is the nutrition of your partner? Because if your partner is eating processed foods, drinking Coca-Cola on a daily basis, and not taking care of themselves, their sperm is not going to be at the quality that it's actually able to, essentially to produce, to make the process. So it really is a process of two people, and it's not just women that often are the ones to, naturally, because we carry a baby, we put so much on us, but it's often not really us that really contributes to it. So it's important to have those conversations with your partner and get your partner checked as well, and get your partner's nutrition on board, which is why when I work with my clients, they usually, I'm always like, what's your family receptivity like to these changes? Because we're going to have to change everyone's things, because we can't just change one person's diet and one person's lifestyle when the other person has completely opposite lifestyle to you. Like, that just simply won't work in the long term if we're creating long-term changes. So it's a sort of comes down to two people.
Oh yeah. And so such an important point there, because there is a lot of guilt, I think, especially with women
Yeah.
around that, because it's like, this is what my body was created and designed to do, and it's not even able to do that. And then there's a lot of that like shame they experience. But again, you give so many actionable steps of what they can do to be proactive and help in that situation, but also recognizing that this is a partnership, just like you said, and seeing how we can optimize every level of that to create the result
Both
that
of you.
you want. So yeah, I love that. And it's just, it's just so empowering, because again, I think there's so many messages out there that it's like, that aren't empowering, that are actually disempowering. So it's
Yeah,
like we can empower women to be their biggest advocate, just like you are. I think that's the biggest thing anyone can take from this is just how can you take what you have uniquely within yourself and maximize your ability to maximize your life. So I love
exactly.
that. One
And
thing I
I see
noticed.
women get pregnant all the time. Like I see
Yeah.
women get pregnant quite often as they weren't able to do it. It wasn't something, but as we begin to change, I think we just underestimate how much our lifestyle affects, really truly affects our bodies. And often when we go to the doctors and people hear things like unexplained fertility, where they can't really talk exactly what it is, it's not 100%, but oftentimes it's exactly what's happening in your body. And often preparation for getting pregnant, it actually needs time. You must be taking things like collagen, folate, the supplements and the stuff that you need to support your body to be able to actually go through this process of ovulation and having a baby. It requires preparation. Sometimes we want to do it on the spot, it doesn't happen, and then we're disappointed. But actually, it's a very normal, it's a normal process, just like for anything, your body needs to be prepared for it. Mhm.
Yeah, it's so important. And then again, it's when you put the pressure on yourself and you have like a time restriction. It's again that's just it places
Gosh, yeah.
stress, which like you said, it changes your hormones and it makes it even harder for yourself. And it becomes this vicious cycle for many women. I've seen it firsthand and many people in my life that have experienced that. And it is a very awful vicious cycle. And it's like that's why it's so important, to get the information out that you
Yeah.
do and what you do, and is understanding ourselves and how can we help ourselves. And that's huge. It's everything. And I
Mhm.
just love that. One thing I notice, so many people I've worked with, is that many women are just out of touch with their bodies. It's like we're very disconnected from the signals and what our bodies are telling us. And can you just talk about that? Is like, how can we get in touch with our bodies a little bit more so we can start to understand what our body is communicating with us? Because just like you said, I'm a huge advocate for listening to ourselves and honoring ourselves, because if we don't, our body just screams louder. So
Yeah.
how can we start to listen to those subtle signals so that our body doesn't have to get to the point where it has to scream louder?
Totally. I also think it's sometimes good to take a step back and just understand where is it coming from? Why are we so disconnected from our bodies? And a lot of it comes down to socialization and just conditioning and the messages that women been hearing forever. Things like be a good girl, listen to the rules, make sure that you make other people happy. So we often tend to put other people's opinions, like, I don't know, some nutritional magazines, do ABC 3 steps in order to get this, and just getting, not really listening to ourselves, but going to external validation to try to find out who's out there saying what's going to be good for my body, rather than actually even just pausing and being like, I am the only person who is the expert in this body, and I'm the one that's going to sort of implement those things. So that's sort of, at first, it's just even recognizing where are you, like, listen, where are you exposed to the socialized messages that women are not meant to trust our bodies, and just even sort of like distract it and break it, and maybe connect to your daughters and your kids whenever you educate them on this case. And when it comes to connecting to your body, I mean, I'm a big fan of menstrual cycle, because that's something that allowed me to reconnect with my body. Because over our menstrual cycle, we quite literally change. There's times when we have so much energy and we're so creative, and there's times when we're like, we couldn't think of anything worse than go out with a friend for a drink, and like it's just complete nightmare. But sometimes we make plans in the cycle, in the phase of our cycle where we're so outgoing, we're like, yeah, let's meet in 2 weeks, it's going to be amazing. Then you meet and then 2 weeks comes and you're like, I just don't want to go. And then we immediately go to this place of self-blaming, self-shaming, and like, oh, I don't follow through on plans, I'm so bad, they're going to be upset at me, they're not going to like me, especially for the people pleasers. This is like complete death.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, but when in reality, actually, understanding your menstrual cycle will really help you develop that self-compassion and self-love for yourself. When you understand that over the course of your period, you're probably not going to want to go out, and you probably want to eat foods that are more nourishing in iron, given that you're losing a lot of it. Then as you go through your menstrual cycle, there's times when you're going to have better mood, and just noticing those things. And sometimes we need to give in sort of blueprint and kind of like a manual of just be like, see what you notice in this parts of your cycle, which is what I do with women when we work with menstrual cycles. I usually tell them, like, next week, this is the phase, like, just notice, and then we observe it. And every single cycle and every single week, they just get this deeper and deeper understanding, to the point where they're like, I know exactly what I'm going to do, exactly what I'm going to eat, exactly I know exactly how my body is going to feel. And so it just gives them this sort of ownership and advocacy over their body, which is a big part. So a big part is menstrual cycle, is starting with track it from the first day of your period, which is the first day of your cycle, and simply just putting it in an application and tracking your symptoms and seeing where you fall in within sort of that spectrum. And that'll give you a lot of data and a lot of like clue-ins as to how to talk to yourself.
It's such a great tip because I mean, there's probably so many people who don't do that. I mean, I
Yeah,
can't say I've done that where I've really
yeah,
tracked how I felt in my menstrual cycle. So it's such a great tip because then we can bring awareness to it. And anytime we bring awareness to anything that's going on within ourselves, now we can start to move forward in it and
yeah,
start to do it in a way that's non-judgmental. It's just like, this is how it was. Okay. How do it's like, you can't
yeah,
change anything unless you have the data for it. So it's like those
totally.
things and recognizing what you're feeling is so important. So thank you for sharing that. One thing you touched on, I want to like have you kind of talk about this further is cravings, because like, when we have those parts of our cycle and we experience a little bit more cravings, a lot of times we shut ourselves down. We're like, no, I'm not eating chocolate this time of month, or I'm not
Yeah.
gonna indulge in these desserts. And we like almost deprive ourselves of that. What would you say to someone when they're experiencing these cravings, and how should they go about that?
Yeah, well, cravings, they happen for a very obvious reason, especially if they're coming in the second half of the cycle, whenever you sort of coming close to a period, is because often we sort of have in the second half of our cycle, we have our estrogen and we have a progesterone hormones, and both of those hormones are they're both on the field, and they're both increasing. But yes, yet because estrogen actually reduces our carb burning ability during the second phase of the cycle, so we don't have as much. Our body actually predominantly tends to burn fat in the second half of our cycle, which is why, and it's a bit of a harder process to access that for energy. So the quickest way for us to get that quick glucose, that quick energy, is actually that bar of chocolate or those bag of chips that we tend to reach for. And often another reason that it happens is because in the second half of the cycle, our metabolism speeds up. Our body temperature, basal body temperature, increases because progesterone tends to increase our body temperature. We get hungrier. The concentration, the brain fog can kick in because of the hormones. And often because of that, we'll crave a little bit more chocolate and a bit more carbs, because our body sort of on the back end is burning as many calories. And often women don't really change their nutrition from phase to phase of their cycle. But the way to prevent those cravings, if you want to if they do take over and you want to kind of calm it down a little bit, is to be proactive about it and top up on things like complex carbohydrates, things like grains, sweet potatoes, wild rice. If you consume more of those things, then your body will have more access to carbohydrates, more access to glucose quicker. So it's not going to sort of try, because essentially cravings is your body's like, I need this particular nutrient. So it's not going to get your body to crave and grab that chocolate and grab those chocolate bars if you are proactive preloading it with nutrients. So that can absolutely help you to sort of pause it a little bit. But also, if you do like chocolate and if you do crave it, specifically 70% plus chocolate, it actually has a bit of magnesium in it. And magnesium is very good for us in the second half of our cycle because it calms us down. So if you do crave that chocolate very much and it'll make you feel better, opt in for 70% and enjoy it. But it's less like donuts and the heartburning stuff. But if you really do crave a little bit, I'm a big fan of dark chocolate, and it's so
Yeah.
beneficial for us.
Yeah, I love that. And again, that proactive approach, I love that. It's like
Yeah,
things we can do and the actionable steps that we can do to help ourselves along this process. And I also like that you said indulge. It's like give everyone permission. You can have a little bit of chocolate and not feel guilty
totally.
about it because your system needs it. So
Exactly.
I love that. I thank you so much for all these tips because there's so many. I mean, I wish I heard you 10, 15 years ago, because like when, everyone goes through these struggles with their menstrual cycle, and when we don't understand it, it can be, one, fearful, two, it can feel like what's wrong with me. And sometimes it's also a thing that's not always spoken out about, openly. And we sometimes hold things in and don't speak about what's going on with our menstrual cycle. So being an advocate like you are it's just absolutely crucial for women to understand that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that your body is speaking to you. And so I thank you for
Yeah,
everything you do.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And for someone who wanted to work with you, connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, since you're listening to us on the podcast, for most of you, I also have a podcast called Feel Better, Be Better, where I talk about menstrual cycles, mindset, and I had you on my podcast, which has been awesome. And otherwise, I'm very active on Instagram, dinara.mukh. It's the same name on Facebook and on TikTok. So come on in, send me a DM if you have any questions. I'm always happy to chat.
Awesome. And I'll put everything in the show notes too for anyone who's listening so you can check out Dinara. And thank you, Dinara, for so much for
Thank you.
everything you've shared today. Believe me, this is going to help so many people just understand themselves, know how they can take the next step forward and in advocating for themselves. So this is just pure gold. So thank you for being here today.
Amazing. I will add one more thing. I've got, for those of you, since we sort of heard talking a lot about hormones and so on, I do have a hormone quiz where you can actually check manually to see which symptoms do you have the most of any particular hormone. Because I think, as we spoke about, the awareness is so important. We'll give a little bit more of, the test will just simply give you, it's more symptomatic based, but it'll give you a bit more picture as to what's happening. So if you are struggling with symptoms of hormonal imbalances, you know what to address so you can fix it. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that if your listeners are interested.
Yeah, definitely. I'll grab the link for me for after this and
Perfect.
I'll put in the show notes. So for anyone who wants to take that quiz and just understand your body better, that's huge. So thank you for
Brilliant.
sharing that.
Thank you
And
for having me on.
yes, absolutely. I've so enjoyed this conversation. And again, for anyone who's listening, if you've enjoyed this conversation and you feel like one of your friends or someone you know or someone in your family would enjoy it, share it with them so that they can also advocate for themselves and understand their bodies. So thank you again for being here. And thank you for everyone who's listening. Thank you for spending your precious time to listen to this episode of Rewiring Health. My mission is to inspire hope and healing through science-backed practices. If you found value in this, please share with 3 people and leave a review. By doing so, this message can be spread to those who need to hear it most. Also, to get updates on the most recent episodes, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being part of this community, and I am forever grateful for you.